Hi everyone, Sosteen here. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about finishing the waistcoat. Now, if you've been following along with my Count Axel von Fersen series, you'll know that I've been working on breeches, the coat, and as well as the waistcoat. I'm going to show the waistcoat in action in Venice as well with some photos that we took there. I really love how everything came out. Now, the waistcoat is one of my favorite parts. Honestly, everything's my favorite part when it comes to court suits because it's all so decadent and I love the embroidery. But waistcoats are super fun. This one's really fun because it has a scattering of embroidery right down the sides as well as the center front. You really don't see it when you're wearing the coat, which kind of is a little sad. And it's also kind of improper to take off the court suit coat, so you never see it. Like, I don't even know why it's there, but I know it's there and I love it. So we're going to work on that, and including making buttons and everything. You'll know that there's a lot that goes into one of these suits. I would say in total, this entire court suit endeavor probably took around 250 to 300 hours. I stopped counting really, mostly because I don't care that much. No matter what, I figured out it takes somewhere between about 150 and 350. I think my record was 450 because each flower took me 8 hours of sitting at the embroidery machine. So overall, I mean, it's not something I do because it's fast. It's something I do because I love it and I genuinely love every single step of the process. So we'll get into the waistcoat. I will not show the digitizing this time, mostly because I forgot to record it. And when I did try, the program I was using was terrible. I'm not even going to talk about that program. I did switch to another program recently, so we'll be using that instead. It's called Camtasia, by the way, if you need it. So it's amazing. I'll be using that to teach digitizing as well. So if you tune into my next video about the Art Nouveau bodice, I will definitely go into the digitizing then. But for today, let's start with the embroidery and then the sewing, and then I'll show you some videos of us actually wearing it. To embroider it, I start by putting the actual pattern on and tracing this out in friction pen, which will go away with ironing. And I put the stabilizer in. I'll link the stabilizer I use below. And then I put it on my hoop. I make sure that the hoop design is exactly where I want it to be. And in this case, I know very well the angle of the front, so I have done that. I pin the hoop and I put it in the machine. So I have my machine scan, and there's a little camera which actually takes a picture of the hoop, and it will actually show my fabric on the screen there, so you can see it there. And I don't know if you could see the pen line that I drew in, but the pen line is there so that I can be sure that the design that I've digitized and that you can see on the screen kind of juxtaposed on top of the design to kind of give me an idea of where it's going to end up actually shows up there. So I can rotate it, I can do a lot of different things to make sure that the design is exactly where I want it to be. So I move up the design by tiny little increments. We're talking 0.5, 0.3 millimeters at times here. And once I do that, I can start embroidering. So now I finally am starting embroidering here. This is a very fast machine. I'm actually happy to say that the times that it estimates are fairly on point. I actually think the few times I've actually timed myself, it actually was exactly on point, which is very nice. It's really nice to be able to count on your machine like that. So the machine I'm using here is a Babylock Valiant. It is their 10 needle. I highly recommend it. And I mean this, one of the nicest parts about this machine is that it actually uses a lower tension. And because I have a lower tension in the machine, it means I can A, go faster, and B, use thinner threads, which is really nice for lace making, but more on that next time. So here I put a piece of silk black taffeta with white silk netting on top, and then I embroidered the areas that I want in white. Then I used a tiny pair of embroidery shears to clip out the excess fabric, and what that actually leaves is a really pretty little insert or an applique, and the borders that you see that are kind of ugly will be covered by the leaf embroidery. So now that that's done, I can switch it up. You'll notice that the thread colors need to be changed, and the thread colors that need to be changed are actually light up differently, so I know which color needs to be what. And then I just go ahead and sit back and relax and let it embroider and do its thing. Now we're at the point where we're putting in that scattered floral embroidery, and you can see some of it here. I'm scanning the hoop right now, and makes it much easier for me to put down the design. So not all machines have this. This is only on the newer Valiants, and I really like this feature. So I can see where the design is going to go, and I can line it up precisely because I have this image. Now this image is not exactly 100% correct. I would say it's off by 0.04 inches or on the X, and about 0.06 inches on the Y-axis. So knowing that, I can kind of have a better idea, but really the best way to know is actually do a stitch placement and see if it's actually right. I actually zoomed in to make sure that that corner was right on point. Okay, and now that I'm happy with it, I'm just going to start embroidering again. Once this is done, it's really nice to just see it. I'm actually really happy to say that for the first time ever, I actually managed to get all the pieces laid out on one panel. Now, even including this little green and black monstrosity of a mistake that I made. And you can see all of it on one panel, and for me emotionally that's really satisfying, because that's how you would have purchased an embroidery panel from an embroidery shop. So that made me really happy. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to preparing the pocket. Now with this interfacing, I do use tearaway. That way you leave really only the silk behind where possible. I iron it, and then I clean up the edges by first getting some iron-on horsehair interfacing from Pellon. I cut out the patterns without the seam allowance, and then I iron it down. After I iron it to the silk fabric, it is now stuck on, I basically very carefully iron the edges down so it's right up to the border of the embroidery. And then I do that for all the sides, and then I use hem tape, which is by Heat and Bond. I use 3/8 inch hem tape from Heat and Bond to insert it inside and keep all the edges down. And this way, I will be hand sewing this, and obviously I use linen lining to cover the back, but this way the embroidery really stays nice and neat no matter what. I really don't recommend skipping this step if you're doing embroidery. But if you find a better way, please tell me and leave me comments teaching me. I really do want to learn how to do it the best possible way. After both sides have been cleaned up using heat and bond, I get the linen pieces and I iron down the seam allowances. After ironing the seam allowances, I connect them wrong side to wrong side, and this way I can iron it, sew it by hand, and have it be nice and neat, and therefore I have a nice linen backed pocket. Oh, and the stitches I use are whip stitches. They're like the stitch that holds the entire 18th century together. I don't think I use any other stitches. It's either some variant of the whip or the whip, so just a heads up. The next step in the process is cleaning up the rest of the lining. So just a heads up, what I do is a little different. Waistcoats in the era did not necessarily always have a lace-up back. They actually just close in the back and the tailor would make sure that it fit perfectly. However, if after a while you gained weight, what would happen is that the tailor would actually kind of cut open that seam and put in eyelets and make it lace up in the back so you could adjust it to your new larger girth. However, my husband goes up and down in weight about, I want to say, about 20 pounds in a 2-week period. It's crazy. I'm so jealous of his ability to just bounce back to his normal weight. So to do that, I actually always make my waistcoats lace up in the back for him, because frock coats are worn open. It really doesn't matter what weight he is, but the waistcoat does need to go up and down about 4 inches, just depending on the month. So for that, I'm actually always design a way to lace it up. So what you're going to see me do is see me sew the lining together, the front to the back on the left and the front to back on the right. And then I'm going to, that they're two completely different pieces from the left and the right, and then I connect it. So that's the way I do it. If it makes no sense, just make your waistcoat however you want using the book's instructions. Please note that I don't do it like that just because, oh, my son came in. And the only reason I do it that way is because I have to. I really refuse to put in the number of hours that I do for my husband's outfits for him to outgrow it for the month of the ball, and then we're just SOL for that waistcoat. So now to the waistcoat proper. Remember how I cleaned up the pockets? This is the same thing that I do for the waistcoat. I iron it, and then I use hem tape to clean it up. And you're going to see me do a lot of work in pajamas because, you know what, guys? I know I'm on YouTube. I don't want to do my hair, makeup, and wear normal. I just can't do it. It's my day off. I'm either post-call. I have a small child. I work 60 hours a week. You'll have to forgive me. But meanwhile, I am wearing pajamas, and they are so comfortable, and I think everyone should sew in pajamas. So remember how I was talking about how I do my back differently because it's designed to have eyelets in the back from the beginning? So here you see me actually putting that in. I'm actually designing it so that it starts with some stitching over here in the back, and that's the gap where everything will go. So again, if you want to ignore my advice for this and just do it because your spouse or you yourself don't go up and down 4 inches in the waist every 2 months, do not worry. Do you, okay? So I've already sewn the backs together, and I'm getting that corner there now, and I literally just iron it and then I put eyelets in. That's really all I do. To connect the fronts of the waistcoat to the linen, really what I do is I literally just iron the linen onto it, pin it, and then whip stitch it. I actually find this to give me the best control. It's not the most technically interesting one to do, and I'm sure there's a lot of shortcuts I could potentially take, but at the end of the day, I really love hand sewing, and it really does give me a very neat edge. So that's what I do. I literally just get my linen and I pat it down, I iron it, and then I turn in the edge about 5/8 of an inch, and then I iron it down to my embroidered portion, and then I pin the whole thing together using lots and lots of glass-headed pins, and then I just hand sew it. Whip stitches, guys, more whip stitching. And that's really all there is. I make sure that the top edge is neat, and then I connect it to the back, and then I also sew that by hand. Everything's just sewn by hand for me because it's really fun. I mean, if you ever watch Bernadette Banner's channel, you'll see that she literally just does everything by hand, and I really respect that because that's the same way I do it. She does everything by hand, like even the long seams, and kudos to her. I myself cannot sew long seams by hand because I do not have the patience. Patience is not my middle name. Incidentally, I do want to mention that my son's middle name in Korean means patience. I was told that I should, so I said, okay, patience is a great middle name. So his name is actually Daegyu, which actually means patient jewel in Korean. So to do the collar, I got the collar pieces and I backed it the same way that I did with the pocket, but then I put the same silk fabric instead of linen on the other side. And I just try to keep the edges as neat as humanly possible when I ironed them together. And because this part would be very easily and clearly seen by everyone. Everyone stares at a man's collar, and everyone also makes judgmental comments on it. So please make this part very neat for your own sanity at the ball later. I'm looking at you, you know who you are. Must you comment on every man's collar? In any case, I then sew that collar onto the waistcoat, and you can see it's been sewn on there, and then I start with the eyelets. One thing I always do by hand is I actually do my eyelets by hand using silk buttonhole thread, and it's really fun. I think I made about 25 eyelets, 13 on one side and 12 on the other for this one. So to lace up the eyelets, I often don't use my fingers because that takes forever. I use a tapestry needle, which you can get off of Amazon for I use them for everything. So I use them for eyelets, I use them for cord, and my sweatpants comes off. So after that's been laced down, I finally cut the threads and I knot the ends. This will be loosened and occasionally, and you can really see the waistcoat come together. Oh, I love the flower on this. I really hate the flower on this because it's so weird, but I also love the flowers on this because they're so bright. But the sprinkling of flowers is honestly my favorite. And you can see exactly how everything is in. Then I start by putting where I want the waistcoat buttons to go. Confession, I ran out of thread in the middle of this, so the number of buttons I have were not quite as many as I wanted there to be. But when you run out of silk thread, and the next chance of getting silk thread means that you will order the silk thread and have to wait 3 to 4 weeks for it to get here from Japan, I realized, you know what, I'm just gonna make do with the buttons I have, and I'll order more thread and make extra buttons and just kind of keep them in case Matt loses them, because he will. And so I mark where the buttonholes will go. I put the entire line in, including the length of it, so that it's a little bit easier for me on my machine. Afterwards, I machine buttonhole this. I'm not going to do it by hand. I have a special buttonhole tool. It goes with my Babylock. I use a Babylock Soprano if you're curious. And it has there's better tutorials for this out there, but suffice it to say, there's a little bar that you lower, and it triggers the buttonhole mechanism, and then the machine just sews that buttonhole for you. And I'm going to let it just run at a normal speed instead of this fast that I normally do, and it's actually strong enough to sew through the 5 layers of fabric and embroidery thread that there is there, and it really just sews through everything and gives me a very neat buttonhole, which is really all I ask for in one of my machines: a straight seam and a buttonhole. So once the buttons have been embroidered, on and sewn, I use a buttonhole tool from Clover to cut it. Instead of trying to use scissors, which kind of can be messy and can accidentally cut fabric, I prefer to use this tool, which is super sharp, and you use a hammer, and because you're using a hammer, it cuts through all 5 layers of fabric, as I mentioned, to really cut through and give you a nice clean edge. Moreover, because I've accidentally like ripped through fabric with the strength of trying to cut through the fabric before and destroyed the embroidery, so I don't do that with this. It's much more precise. Highly recommended. After all that, it's time to sew on the pocket flaps. The pocket flaps go down where I want them to, and I just, again, use a whip stitch to do some tiny stitches so that everything is nice and neat and invisible, and the pockets then go on. Afterwards, I sew the buttons on, and that's it. We are done. The waistcoat is super fast and super emotionally satisfying, people. Oftentimes it only needs to be the only thing embroidered in your outfit, and it still adds so much pizzazz. An embroidered waistcoat is everything, and it's, oh god, I can't pick, but it's one of my favorite parts of the court suit. And it's done. Thank you so much to Matt for always modeling and always being a great sport and really being the best, costume partner ever. Finally, I do want to say thank you guys for watching, and I will announce the winners of the challenge. I'm still going through all the entries, and they're amazing. There's, I think, going to be like 3 or 4 winners, and you're all going to get the prizes over the next year. But in any case, thank you so much for participating. And moreover, thanks so much for watching. I will be going into a new series next time on how to make an Art Nouveau Edwardian bodice. And it's going to be a sort of a made-up bodice, sort of based on a Worth bodice for my Art Nouveau skirt. And this is something I plan on wearing to the prior tire ball. I have like 3 outfits I want to wear to that ball, so let's see what I actually end up picking. But for now, I'm going to make everything. And really, it's just going to be a lot of fun. Please remember to subscribe if this is the kind of videos you enjoy watching.